Hello guys, welcome to this video lesson. Today we will talk about the Romantic poetry. And in particular, we're going to go through this paragraph talking about the role of the imagination for the Romantic poets, the special figure of the child, the importance of the individual for Romanticism. Um, we're going to talk about the romantic view of nature, how they considered the poetic technique, and the division of romantic poets into two generations, the first generation and the second one. Right, let's start from page 259, talking about the power of imagination. This was a very important faculty for romantic poets, to be distinguished and was actually in contrast to reason. Um, the Romanticism began in England at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of 19th century. And the best form to express the feelings of the poets, of the writers, was most of all the poetry. Because poetry best suited the need to give expression to the emotional experience and the individual feelings of the poets. So imagination had a primary role, a very important role in the process of the poetic composition. Thanks to the imagination, the Romantic poets could see beyond the surface of the reality and discover the truth. And this faculty was beyond the powers of the reason. Okay, reason couldn't reach the truth like imagination could. The poets, using their imagination, could discover the truth, and this possibility was not couldn't be achieved by reason. For this reason, imagination became to be seen as a divine faculty and allowed the poet to recreate and modify the external world of the experience. If we talk about the power of imagination seen as a divine faculty, we have two poets in particular, William Blake, William Wordsworth, and Coleridge. In particular, in the preface of the lyrical ballads, they talk about the power of imagination. And the poem became also a visionary. He was seen like a prophet, like William Blake, who was a pre-romantic poet, who was considered a visionary poet. The poet was also seen as a teacher, and the task of the poet was to mediate between nature and man. And the poet had to observe and point out the evils of society, and in particular he had to give voice to the ideals of freedom, liberty, beauty, and truth. The child was the concept, the theory of the childhood was very important for Romantic poets. The condition of the childhood was seen as a serious thing, because of the experience and the profound perception and intuition of childhood was considered by the Romantic poets very important, because let's see first the differences between the Augustan age and the Romantic age. During the Augustan age, the child was seen only for as a human being, because the child was the living age of a human being who later became an adult and a civilized being. Instead, the childhood, for this reason, childhood was considered during the Augustan age only a temporary state, and a necessary stage in the process leading to the adulthood. Instead, for the Romantic poets, the child was purer. He was an innocent being. He was purer than adult. He was more innocent than the adult, because the adult would become later in his age very corrupted by the civilization, and because of the uncorrupted sensitiveness and the emotional sensibility of the child, the child was considered closer to God and closer to the sources of God's creation. Therefore, the childhood was a living stage of the human beings, which was to be admired and cultivated. And for this reason, the Romantic poets believed in the power of childhood as the most important stage of human life. And in particular, the cult of the childhood was appreciated by Blake and Wordsworth, the two romantic poets, Blake and Wordsworth. Let's see now the importance of the individual. During Romantic age, there was a new emphasis on the individual. While the Augustans had seen the man as a social animal, and they analyzed the man in relationship with his fellows, the Romantics saw man seen like a solitary figure. The Romantics saw the man essentially in a kind of solitary state, and they stressed the special qualities of each individual's mind. The Romantics exalted the atypical, the outcast. We have a very important example in the figure of the monster in Frankenstein, the creature in Frankenstein. And also the figure of the rebel was very important during this period. Like, for example, the Byronic hero by Lord Byron, a poet of the second generation of poets, of Romantic poets. In this period, we have the theories of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who stated that the conventions of civilization represented were intolerable restrictions, were considered intolerable restrictions on the individual personality, and produced every kind of corruption and evil. Therefore, Rousseau, I have to remind you that Rousseau was one of the major poetical philosophers of the Enlightenment. And he believed that a natural behavior which was unrestrained and impulsive is good, is very good, in contrast to the behavior which is governed by reason and by the rules and customs of society. We have the important theory by Rousseau, the myth of the noble savage, which was a concept specifically romantic. And they say savage, who may appear primitive, but he has an instinctive knowledge of himself and of the world, which was often superior to the knowledge which has been acquired by the civilized man. And thanks to the Rousseau's theory, during the Romanticism, Rousseau, with his theories, influenced the cult of the exotic in the Romantic poets. The cult of the exotic was a kind of veneration of what is far away, both in space and time. And the Romantic poets, they welcomed the picaresque in the scenery, picturesque in scenery, but they also looked for what was considered remote and unfamiliar to the traditions, and they were looking for something which was far away from the normal and the traditional mental attitude. Okay, this is a very complex concept, but the cult of the exotic was very important for the Romantic poets, and they had a view of nature very, very singular, because nature, they regarded nature as a living force and was seen in a kind of pantheistic vein as an expression of God in the universe. Nature became the main source of inspiration and a stimulus of thought, a source of comfort and joy, and a means to convey moral truths. The poetic technique used by the Romantic poets was the outbreak of and the breaking free from all the traditional models and rules, and they in particular searched for a new and individual style through the choice of a language and a particular subject which was suitable to their poetry. They had a very important issue which has been discussed during the Romantic age and in Romantic aesthetics, which was the problem of the poetic diction. The poetic diction is a term used to refer to the linguistic style, the vocabulary and the metaphors used in writing a poem. Okay, the Romantic poets were looking for more vivid and familiar words, which began to replace the artificial periphrasis and circumlocution of the 18th century diction. So the symbols and images lost their decorative function in order to assume a vital role as the vehicles of the inner visionary perceptions. We have two generations of poets. The English Romanticism is usually divided into two generations of poets. The first generation, with William Wordsworth and Samuel Coleridge, was characterized by the attempt to theorize about poetry. And they planned together, Coleridge and Wordsworth, they planned the Lyrical Ballads, which was a collection of their poems. And their plan was that Wordsworth would write about the beauty of nature and would deal with the ordinary things. And the aim was the principal aim of Wordsworth was to make ordinary things more interesting for the reader. Instead, Coleridge should deal with visionary topics like the supernatural and the mystery. The second generation of poets, of romantic poets, were George Gordon Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and John Keats. They experienced the political disillusionment, and they reflected this disillusionment in their poems, and they also dealt with the clash, the contrast between the ideal and the real. The main themes of their poems were individualism, escapism, and also alienation, the alienation of the artist, which was a separate individual, separated from society. And this sense of alienation was stronger in this second generation of poets, and found its expression in the different attitudes of these three poets. They were anti-conformist, rebellious, and cynical, like the Byronic hero, and they had a revolutionary spirit and a stubborn hope, like the Prometheus, which was the protagonist of the poem by Shelley. And Keats, in particular, his poems talk about a kind of escape into the world of a classical beauty. And the poets of the second generation died very young, and they were far away from their home in Mediterranean countries. In particular, Lord Byron died in Greece, and instead Shelley died after his boat was caught by a storm near Viareggio, and John Keats died in Rome because of a very bad disease. This was the destiny of these three poets who died very, very young. Okay, that's all for today, and I'll see you for the next video lesson. Okay, take care. Bye bye.